Oh dear. It's easy to get lost in the rage about Dominic Cummings right now, but how bad was this bloke's actions in comparison to others? Here's a top 10 list of COVID-idiots within the British population. So sit back, relax, don't forget to subscribe, and let's put these people in the stocks of shame.
This atmosphere of total belief in what Big Brother tells us, and this collapse into the arms of Big Brother by supposedly free societies with long histories of public debate. It's most dispiriting, and I fight against it, but I have to tell you there are moments when I think that really we have reached something very like the end of civil society.
Number 10. Peter Hitchens. He's in our 10th spot for being the outright lockdown denier. Now, granted, some people are legitimately scared about the economic impact of lockdown, which is why he's not further up on our list. But this guy seems to exploit the concern and profit from it in his articles. He says that the virus isn't as dangerous as claimed by the government, which leads to the conspiracy that it's all some kind of deliberate brainwashing exercise to take away our liberal rights and freedoms. And while I agree that scaring people too much is dangerous and the health impact of a dwindling economy has to be considered, there isn't really any scientific evidence to suggest that not socially distancing or never socially distancing would be beneficial to controlling the virus. Also, the only examples we have to go on are Sweden and Brazil. Two very different countries to the UK, and two countries which have seen a very different number of cases to each other. And lastly, it all encourages non-compliance with the lockdown rules, which is not only dangerous in spreading the virus, but you have to ask if people start breaking these laws because they distrust the government based on exploitative political journalists, then how many other laws can a journalist persuade us to break?
Why is it that the reality is that we turned out to be so underprepared?
That's not true. And
that is true.
Well, it's not, and
it's plainly true, isn't it? You haven't had enough PPE, you haven't got enough tests, you didn't have enough ventilators. What was it you were prepared for?
Piers, I think you're slightly misjudging the public mood, because I've come on
I don't give a damn about the public mood. I care about you answering my questions.
I've come on this programme to answer the questions, and I was just about to do that. You asked me about 4 questions in that series, and I'm going to now go through each one of them in turn, and I'd really appreciate it if you didn't interrupt me, okay?
Number 9. Piers Morgan. Piers, oh Piers. Once Trump's bestie and now unfollowed forever. This guy's on our list because prior to this crisis, he made a deliberate attempt to be open about his political views and therefore gained an audience who agreed with those views. But at the same time, he exposed journalism and those interrupting gotcha-style interviews as more about the journalist's beliefs than the interviewees. And then all of a sudden, during the crisis, he went from attacking woke politics and the liberal left on Twitter to suddenly siding with them. And instead of supporting a government he helped put in power, he started criticising them. Now, whenever people watch an interview with a journalist, everyone thinks that whenever the journalist interrupts, it's to change a political narrative more than it is to ask a genuine question, making people distrust journalists even more. Now that he's turned on his audience, everybody's questioning their trust in the media. Are they really about holding the government to account? Or is it more to create headlines, stoke rage, and fear get likes, clicks, and follows? Piers, as a journalist, has also lost contact and potential interviews with the leader of the free world. Wah, wah, wah.
Our aim is for pubs open for the duration. This could go on for a long time. And I think that once you shut them down, it's very difficult. Supermarkets are very, very crowded. Pubs are much less crowded. There's hardly been any transmission of the virus within pubs. And I think it's over the top to shut them. That's a commercial view, but I think it's also a common sense view.
Number 7. Tim Martin, aka the Wetherspoons guy. Ah yes, what could be more British than going round to Spoons for a pint? So this guy initially criticised the lockdown and promised to stay open even after the government advised pubs to shut. Then he went on before the furlough scheme was announced, saying that he will be unable to pay the staff as they have no cash through the tills, and to go to work for Tesco. Wetherspoons had left over 40,000 people without their next pay date, with no means of paying rent, bills or food, and no warning, employees said in a letter to the media. And perhaps unsurprisingly, Wetherspoons were one of the first to announce plans for ending lockdown measures, including having ketchup in sachets and perspex screens in the pub. Plans which seem unlikely to help the business survive. Perhaps Tim Martin can be forgiven for trying to make money and keep the business afloat, but he's still on our idiot list for frightening his employees and playing down the virus the week the rest of Europe was in lockdown and the week that we should have been too.
60% is the sort of figure you need to get herd immunity.
Number 6. Sir Patrick Vallance. They do move in herds. So, during a Sky interview, the suggestion became clear that the government was trying to deliberately make 60% of the population get coronavirus, cough cough, and die, and that it would no longer find any other carriers to pass itself through a population. He made it seem like that was the government's policy, and so many journalists and the outraged Twitter mob were furious.
How dare you?
How dare the government put the economy before people? How dare the government deliberately experiment on its own population? We didn't even know the long-term effects of getting the virus, and he was forced to defend the comments in a Radio 4 interview the following morning, saying, "Our aim is to try and reduce the peak, broaden the peak, not to suppress it completely. Also, because the vast majority of people get a mild illness, to build up some degree of herd immunity as well, so that more people are immune to the disease." To MPs, he said, "What I was trying to say was that in the absence of a therapeutic, the way in which you can stop a community becoming susceptible to this is through immunity, and immunity can be obtained by vaccination, or it can be obtained by people who have the infection." For the scientific advisor, this was a huge communication error, and it might be because science itself doesn't really lend itself to headlines in newspapers, because it often takes a degree to fully understand. But whatever the reason, the mistake made people distrust the government's strategy. Number 5. Piers Corbin. Oh, Jeremy Corbyn. Oh no, wait, it's his brother. So who thinks to stand in Hyde Park in a big group with some signs, because that's really going to show them we don't like this lockdown and they'll definitely change their mind now? As Spock would say, I found their reasoning most illogical. First of all, lots of people had already died from the virus, more than any other country in Europe, partly because the UK went into lockdown a week later than France or Germany. Yet these people were advocating against the lockdown completely. Secondly, the only way out of some social distancing might be some kind of vaccine, and yet Piers Corbin, of all the bright sparks, was reported to be making anti-vaccination claims. Finally, not only was he making 5G claims, but if you're gonna do a protest, try not to get arrested, as he was taken into custody for refusing to leave and failing to provide his details. Now I know what you're thinking, they're slowly taking away our rights and freedoms and now you're not even allowed to protest. But if that was really the case, don't you think there would be more people angry about it than this small mob? Don't you think that if that was really the case, there would be some kind of coup or civil war? There isn't, because most people understand the government has to legally review the measures every 3 weeks, and our government is accountable to Parliament. Parliament, which has your brother in, Piers, but less of his friends now.
I've already issued a statement this morning apologising unreservedly for travelling away from my home while restrictions were in place. As well as this weekend, it's important to be clear that I also was there last weekend with my husband. I did not follow the advice I'm giving to others. I'm truly sorry for that. I've seen a lot of the comments from members of the public on Twitter today, People calling me a hypocrite. People telling me about the hardships they've endured while following my guidance. My office has also received emails from members of the public who are making clear to me their disappointment and unhappiness at what I've done. People have told me that I'm irresponsible, that I've behaved as if my advice does not apply to me. I want people to know that I have seen all of that, and I've heard the comments. What I did was wrong. I'm very sorry. It will not happen again.
Number 4. Dr Catherine Calderwood. This one's quite high on our list because, in fairness, she did resign. Scotland's chief medical officer was caught flouting her own rules by visiting a second home, an hour away from her first home. Not once, but twice. Nicola Sturgeon initially backed her, but it was all a bit embarrassing and she eventually resigned.
Social distancing. Yeah. Move that way. Great. Pass through.
Can you really defend
You're supposed to be more than 2 metres apart.
Can you defend your actions?
You're supposed to be more than 2 metres apart. Move out the way.
Can you really defend your actions, Mr. Cummings, during the lockdown? It's not a good look, Mr. Cummings, is it?
Why do you think it was reasonable to travel 260 miles, Mr. Cummings, when you might have had coronavirus?
I behaved reasonably and legally. Hey, little Kenny, you ready to go?
That's not a good look, though, is it, Mr. Cummings?
Who cares about good looks? Well, it's a question of doing the right thing. It's not about what you guys think.
Number 3. Dominic Cummings / Neil Ferguson. So I put these two together because I couldn't decide who was more important, the bloke who told us to go into lockdown or the bloke who told Boris to tell us to go into lockdown. Neil Ferguson, the bloke that came up with the models, went to go meet his lover and had to resign as a result. Dominic Cummings travelled from London to County Durham with his partner and 4-year-old son after his wife developed coronavirus symptoms and he was self-isolating. Mr. Cummings said the family had made the 260-mile journey as they wished to be close to family so that their son could be cared for if he and his wife became seriously ill. A witness also claims he saw Mr. Cummings in Barnard Castle on Easter Sunday, 30 miles away from Durham, during the period he was believed to be self-isolating. There were further reports that Mr. Cummings returned to Durham following a spell back in London on an allegation he denies. Official guidelines warn against long-distance travel. So who's worse? The bloke who was allegedly looking after his kid and didn't resign, or the person who was going for some hanky-panky and did? Either way, they've been naughty, but they're not the worst on our list. We now come to the section of the video I like to call people who also broke the lockdown rules. Robert Jenrick, the Housing and Communities and Local Government Secretary, was caught travelling 150 miles from his London property to his Hertfordshire home, from where he travelled to his parents in Shropshire. He defended his actions, saying he went to deliver food and medicine to his isolating parents. Stephen Kinnock travelled to London to celebrate his parents' birthday. And finally, Kyle Walker.
This is just one of over a dozen fires targeting 5G towers in the Netherlands. And the country isn't alone. Cyprus, Belgium and Ireland among those home to conspiracy theorists who believe 5G may have some connection to COVID-19. The UK has reported around 50 fires targeting towers and other 5G equipment.
Number 2. David Icke. So he's in our number 2 spot because although he's the biggest idiot in our list, he's not the most important idiot. Yes, this is the guy who spread the conspiracy that 5G is linked to coronavirus. 5G does not give you coronavirus. Okay, if you think it does, let me explain. 1. Mobile phones emit radio waves. Ionizing radiation is different, but both are forms of light contained on the electromagnetic spectrum. Either way, there is no way a beam of light can transmit a biological virus. While radiotherapy patients who have been exposed to X-rays, which is a different form of light than radio waves, are more prone to getting the virus, This is because their immune system is weaker, but not because of anything to do with radio waves. It's because of radiation caused from X-rays. Radio waves and radiation sound similar, but they are two completely different things. One's a huge wave, too big to ionize an atom in your body, and the other is tiny and small enough to mess with the atoms. The big radio waves come from a phone mast, and the other types of wave do not. Huawei is a Chinese company installing 5G in the UK. They do not spread coronavirus. If you destroy a phone mast, you're making it harder, not easier, for the emergency services to respond to coronavirus. And finally,
that I'm shaking hands continuously. I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody. You'll be pleased to know, and I continue to shake hands. And I think it's very important that we, people obviously can make up their own minds. I think that Matt has said that people must make up their own minds, but I think the scientific evidence is, well, I'll hand over to the experts. But our judgment is wash. Washing your hands is the crucial thing. Yes. Before you shake hands, obviously.
Number 1. Boris Johnson. Now I know many of you will be fans of Boris Johnson, and there is an argument for saying that it's lonely and hard at the top. But it's also incredibly easy to make a huge list of the idiotic decisions to come out of this government. From enabling Robert Jenrick and Dominic Cummings to break the rules and keep their jobs, to shaking hands and then getting coronavirus himself, potentially leaving a country leaderless. Of course, Boris chose to go into lockdown a week later than France or Germany. It was the government who set up the Nightingale hospitals only to not use them. It was the government that failed to test early on. It was the government who failed to provide PPE. It's the government who have a large chunk of responsibility for the number of deaths we have. Basically, every point on this list could equally be blamed by the government, the head of which is Boris Johnson. But I also like to think the government also encouraged many of our COVID-19 heroes. A list that would be harder to make because we don't scream and shout about those people quite the same way. But who's your biggest idiot? Join in the debate below and subscribe.